Where are the 12 tribes of Israel really? Were they lost forever, or do they still remain hidden among the nations? Will they reappear on the stage of history? And what role will they play in the prophetic events of the end times? Questions like these have intrigued historians, rabbis, archaeologists, and explorers throughout the centuries. However, the first key lies not in an ancient map or a forgotten ruin, but in the history of Israel itself, a history that remains alive and full of mystery. Dear listener, this documentary will follow the trail of the 12 tribes from their original homeland to the farthest reaches of the planet. We will explore historical sources, archaeological discoveries, and prophetic signs that may reveal that the reunion of the tribes is much closer than we imagine. Let's get started. The history of the 12 tribes of Israel is not merely an ancient genealogical record. It is a divine structure, a symbol repeated throughout Scripture. The number 12 from Genesis to Revelation represents fullness, divine order, and perfect government. There were 12 sons of Jacob whom God called Israel, and from them sprang the tribes that populated the promised land. Joshua placed 12 stones in the bed of the Jordan River as a visible testimony of God's covenant with his people. In the tabernacle, 12 loaves were always on the table of shewbread, reminding us that God continually sustains the 12 tribes. In the book of Revelation, the New Jerusalem is described as having 12 foundations and 12 gates, each named after a tribe. The number 12 is no accident. It is the Creator's signature, indicating that his plan is complete and perfect. Each tribe received a portion of land, thus fulfilling the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Under the reigns of Saul, David, and Solomon, the 12 tribes remained united, worshiping in a single temple and recognizing a single throne. It was the era of greatest national splendor. The Temple of Jerusalem shone as a symbol of the divine presence, and the borders extended as never before. But even the wisest king can become foolish if he turns his heart away from God. Solomon, blessed with incomparable wisdom, gave in to the influence of his many foreign wives, tolerating and permitting idolatry in Israel. What began as a glorious reign ended marked by spiritual infidelity. In 1 Kings chapter 11, God delivered his verdict. The kingdom would be divided. The prophet Ahijah announced to Jeroboam that he would receive 10 tribes, while Judah would remain with Rehoboam, son of Solomon, to preserve the Davidic dynasty. After Solomon's death, Rehoboam assumed the throne. The pent-up tensions erupted when the young king rejected the advice of the elders and opted for harsh and reckless rule. The northern tribes rebelled, crowned Jeroboam, and formed the northern kingdom of Israel, with its capital in Samaria. The southern kingdom retained Judah, Benjamin, and part of Levi, with its capital in Jerusalem. Rabbi Rashi summed up this tragedy by saying, "When the king's heart was divided, the kingdom was also divided." Jeroboam, fearing that the people would turn their hearts to Jerusalem, established 2 alternate sanctuaries, one at Bethel and one at Dan. There he set up golden calves, repeating the sin of Exodus chapter 32. Theologian Arnold Fruchtenbaum explains that this decision was not merely a political strategy, but an open break with legitimate worship, provoking divine judgment. Within a few years, the northern kingdom fell into ever deeper idolatry, completely distancing itself from the Torah. Prophets like Elijah, Elisha, Hosea, and Amos were sent to warn them, but for the most part, the people persisted in sin. Worshipping pagan gods and adopting the practices of neighboring nations, which brought God's judgment and culminated in their conquest by the Assyrian Empire. According to the chronology used by historical studies based on the accounts of kings and the Assyrian chronicles, the fall of Samaria occurred during the reign of Sargon II. Academic research agrees that Shalmaneser V initiated the military operation, but Sargon, already in power, claimed the final conquest in his annals, placing the outcome between the years 722 and 720 before Christ. This double attribution appears both in royal inscriptions and in the studies of specialists such as Nadav Naaman and Karen Radner, who have analyzed in detail the sequence of the siege and its end. The Annals of Sargon II, preserved on the Nimrud prism and in the Khorsabad inscriptions, record the capture of Samaria and include a key numerical figure: 27,290 inhabitants were deported. They also mention the typical administrative measures of Assyria after a conquest, such as the appointment of a governor, the reorganization of the region as a province, and the imposition of tribute, elements that are repeated in modern editions of royal inscriptions and epigraphic compendia. Samaria did not fall in a day. The city withstood a prolonged siege until its strength was exhausted. Scripture dates this siege to the time of Shalmaneser and records the fall as a point of no return for the northern kingdom, stressing that the ultimate cause was the infidelity of the people, not just the military pressure of a more powerful empire. Long before the walls surrendered, the land had already begun to empty. Tiglath-Pileser III had taken towns in Galilee and Naphtali in a first wave of deportations, according to 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 29. East of the Jordan, the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh were carried away to Halah, Habor, and Gozan when God raised up the kings of Assyria against them, as recorded in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 26. The fall of the capital did not inaugurate the dispersion, it culminated it. With the defeat of Samaria, the map was defined. The deportees were transferred to Halah, to Habor near Gozan, and to the cities of Media, as instructed in the 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 6. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria, and carried Israel away captive to Assyria, and settled them in Halah, in Habor by the river Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. It's a geographical fan that stretches from Upper Mesopotamia to the Zagros Mountains. There was no single final destination. There was a network of resettlements designed to shatter the memory of a people. The Assyrian program of deportations and resettlement was not improvised. It was part of a state policy that simultaneously sought to diffuse hotbeds of rebellion, better exploit resources, and dilute identities susceptible to insurrection. The imperial administration moved elites, artisans, and skilled labor between provinces, while also bringing in foreign populations to occupy the vacated lands, creating a new and more controllable social matrix. Research led by Karen Radner on the UCL project details this demographic engineering, its political and economic goals, and even the logistics of transporting entire families with state supplies and protection. After the fall, Samaria was converted into the province of Samaria. Sargon's inscriptions mention that the city was reinstated and repopulated, a technical term that, as Sean Astor explains, it refers to the arrival of settlers from other regions and the administrative reorganization under Assyrian supervision. The figure of 27,290 deportees is thus part of a larger picture, a two-way flow of populations within the empire to ensure productivity, fiscal loyalty, and political control. The administrative memory of this demographic engineering endured. Already in Persian times, the inhabitants of Samaria remembered that they had been brought by kings of Assyria and by Ashnapper, according to Ezra 4, verses 2, 10, and 11. It wasn't an isolated movement. It was a sustained policy that forever reshaped the province. Even so, the Bible bears witness to the threads that were not broken. There were remnants from the north who responded to Hezekiah's call to celebrate Passover in Jerusalem. Of Ephraim, Manasseh, Asher, and Zebulun, some humbled themselves and went up, as related in 2 Chronicles chapter 30, verses 1 to 12. Years later, during Josiah's reforms, contributions from Manasseh, Ephraim, and the rest of Israel for the work on the temple are mentioned, as alluded to in 2 Chronicles chapter 34, verses 6 and 7. These discrete lines explain why, even in the midst of dispersion, there were families and clans from the north who adhered to the southern cult and left a mark on Judah. This is the picture that Scripture paints: a siege that ends in collapse, deportations in stages, precisely named destinations, planned repopulation to dilute identities, syncretism as a spiritual consequence, and at the same time, a remnant that never fades and that turns its face toward Jerusalem. The big question now is, where are the tribes? The Bible provides an initial map with precise names: Halah, Habor by the Gozan River, and the cities of Media. This is not a vague phrase. It is the way the sacred text establishes, in real geographical terms, the fate of the first major relocation of the northern tribes after the fall of Samaria. In 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 6, these points are located. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away captive to Assyria, and settled them in Halah, in Habor by the river Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 26, another very early wave is recalled that had already taken Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh to Halah, Habor, and Gozan. Let's note what the biblical account says. Wherefore the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul king of Assyria, and the spirit of Tiglath-Pileser king of Assyria, that they carried away the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and brought them unto Halah, and to Habor, and to Harah, and to the river Gozan, unto this day. The Habor by the Gozan feature is often identified with the Kabur and Guzana Tel Halaf in Upper Mesopotamia, while Halah and the cities of Media project the route to the Zagros and the western Iranian plateau. This is the historical epicenter of the northern exile. From there, the trail becomes blurred because the Assyrian policy of dispersal and repopulation mixed populations, languages, and cults, diluting tribal visibility in a network of multi-ethnic enclaves. This blurring doesn't mean immediate disappearance, but rather a loss of clarity in the recording. The biblical text marks where the first pieces fell on the board. Imperial history explains why it is so difficult to follow them later. The Assyrians redistributed entire communities, brought in foreign settlers, and redesigned provinces. With Samaria converted into Samarina, this demographic engineering sought to extinguish any possibility of recomposing the old identity. The spiritual outcome described in 2 Kings chapter 17 is a syncretism that blurs the contours. The historical outcome we see is a Mesopotamian Iranian diaspora whose details become blurred over time. Centuries later, the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus writes from the Second Temple period and states that the 10 tribes are beyond the Euphrates until now, and they are an immense multitude. In short, Josephus establishes 2 things. First, that the bulk of the northern tribes remained east of the Euphrates in the Mesopotamian Iranian area, outside the direct Roman radius. Second, their number was large, although not integrated with Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, the visible tribes in Judea and the western diaspora. Josephus does not provide a map, but his statement confirms the Jewish memory that the demographic heart of the northern exile lay in the orbit of Media, Parthia, and beyond. Josephus's usefulness is twofold. On the one hand, he converges with the biblical coordinates that already pointed to Media. On the other, he expands the reading horizon. Beyond the Euphrates suggests an eastern continuity of the tribes in regions that, with the passage of empires, included corridors towards Hyrcania, Bactria, and Transoxiana. Thus, the biblical line that ran from Halah, Habor, Gozan, and Media finds an echo in the historical intuition of a massive settlement to the east. Now the combination of cities of Media and beyond the Euphrates opens up a range that medieval Jewish chroniclers and travelers filled with specific names. In the 12th century, Benjamin of Tudela collected traditions about an Israelite presence in Nishapur and areas of Khorasan, reflecting the Jewish awareness of an eastern continuity of the exile. It does not in itself prove a specific tribal identification, but it documents local memory and stable Jewish networks on the Iran-Central Asia axis, consistent with the expansion described by Josephus. Furthermore, medieval rabbinic sources and accounts such as those of Eldad Hadani preserve the idea of Israelite groups beyond difficult borders, sometimes described with the motif of the Sambation River, a legendary boundary symbolizing distance and separation. These traditions are not technical maps, but they keep alive the testimony of a fragmented Eastern Israel, which Halakha and prophetic hope reserve for times of future reunion. Now, when Jesus appeared in history, the 10 northern tribes were already a vague memory in human history. However, in his words and actions, there are clear signs that the 12 tribes were not left out of God's plan. Jesus spoke, acted and chose his disciples with a prophetic intentionality that looks toward restoration. First, Israel's priority. Jesus frames his mission in the house of Israel. He sends the 12 first to the lost sheep of Israel and declares that he was sent to those sheep, underscoring a principle of historical priority in the order of redemption. This priority does not exclude nations. It establishes the starting point from which salvation expands. Second, the 12 as a sign of restoration. Jesus didn't choose 11 or 13. He chose 12 apostles as a visible sign that God is symbolically reconstituting Israel around the Messiah. This reading, developed by scholars such as Wright, France, and Craig Keener, understands that the election of the 12 proclaims that the kingdom has burst forth with the intention of reuniting the dispersed. Explicit confirmation comes in his eschatological promises. Jesus assures us that in the regeneration or palingenesis, the apostles will sit on thrones to judge the 12 tribes of Israel. This statement is decisive. Jesus maintains the category of the 12 tribes in force in the future of the kingdom. He doesn't treat them as a mythical relic. He projects them to the end of history under his authority. Third, the great final reunion. In his eschatological discourse, Jesus announces that the Son of Man will gather his chosen ones from the four winds, a language that echoes the prophetic hope of entry and reunion from all corners of the earth. The phrase does not literally mention each tribe by name, but its resonance with Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel points to the reunification of God's people around the Messiah, where tribal identity is no longer lost in God's eyes. Fourth, the other sheep and the universal reach. When Jesus speaks of other sheep, who are not of this fold, and whom he must also bring so that there may be one flock and one shepherd, he is anticipating the inclusion of the nations into one people under his lordship. The majority interpretation sees Gentiles here. Some authors have also suggested an allusion to the dispersed people of the north. Whatever the emphasis, the theological point is clear. Jesus does not abolish Israel. Jesus expands the people of God by integrating Jews and Gentiles into a messianic unity without losing the promise given to the tribes. Fifth, from Israel to the nations without losing the thread. After the resurrection, the mandate is to go and make disciples of all nations. The universal mission does not erase the story of Israel. It crowns it. What began with the sheep of the house of Israel overflows to the entire world. While the hope of the 12 tribes remains inscribed in Jesus' promise of an eschatological judgment and government, where they remain a recognizable reality under his reign. Now the fall of Samaria and the deportations to Halah, Habor, Gozan, and the cities of Media turned the northern tribes into a diffuse people in the eyes of history. However, for Israel's prophets, they never ceased to be present in God's sight. They spoke of a real return, of national reunification, and of a spiritual restoration under the scepter of the Son of David. His message is not vague. It has geography, time, conditions, and an ultimate goal: unity, holiness, and God's rule over a complete people. Isaiah paints a broader picture. He speaks of a new exodus in which God raises a banner visible to the nations and summons his exiles from all directions. He names known routes through the northern exile and opens the map to Africa and the islands. The central point is not just the return to the land. It is the end of the old wound between Judah and Ephraim. What was once divided becomes a family again under the hand of the Lord. On the other hand, Jeremiah speaks of a return with a new heart and a renewed covenant. God brings his people back from the north and the ends of the earth, but at the same time he writes his law within them. The return does not repeat the history of infidelity. It restores communion, identity, and obedience. Israel and Judah are summoned as royal houses before the God who forgives and rebuilds. For his part, the prophet Ezekiel describes 2 rods in one hand and 1 king. Ezekiel turns the promise into a powerful symbol. 2 rods with ancient names, Judah and Joseph, are fused into one in God's hand. There will no longer be 2 kingdoms. There will be 1 king of the lineage of David, 1 shepherd, 1 purified people, 1 life-giving spirit, and 1 sanctuary in their midst. Here, healing is complete, political, spiritual, and cultic. The nation becomes one again. All converge in a simple yet profound arc: dispersion through infidelity, reunion through grace, tribal unity under the Davidic king, inner renewal through the Spirit and purified worship, visible restoration that becomes a sign for the nations. Thus, the wound that began with Samaria is healed, and the hope of a whole people in the kingdom is opened. In Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 22, it says, "And I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel, and one king will be king over them all. And they will no longer be two nations, nor will they be divided into two kingdoms anymore." Now, something is happening in our day. After centuries of apparent silence, a phenomenon began to emerge in the second half of the 20th century that has surprised both the Jewish world and Bible researchers. Communities claiming descent from the lost tribes of Israel are returning one by one from the most remote corners of the planet. This return is not improvised. It is rooted in a legal, religious, and prophetic framework. In 1950, just 2 years after the founding of the State of Israel, the Law of Return was passed, a fundamental decree granting every Jew the right to immigrate to Israel and automatically receive citizenship. This law was drafted to ensure that, after the Holocaust, no Jew would be left without a safe place in the world. But over the years, it also became an opening for the return of communities considered descendants of ancient tribes. Israel's chief rabbinate, the highest Jewish religious authority in the country, began to examine the claims of these communities. The process was thorough, including historical, linguistic, anthropological, and sometimes genetic analysis. Through these procedures, several groups were officially recognized as part of the people of Israel, with the right to settle in the land of their ancestors. Among the first to be recognized are the Bnei Menashe, a community living in the states of Mizoram and Manipur in northeastern India and neighboring Burma, Myanmar. For generations, they maintained customs that caught the attention of missionaries and anthropologists. They kept the Sabbath as a day of rest, practiced dietary laws similar to those of kashrut, celebrated festivals reminiscent of biblical feasts, and preserved oral accounts of an ancient exodus from a distant land, crossing a great river before settling in their present region. They claimed descent from the tribe of Manasseh, one of the sons of Joseph. According to their traditions, their migration eastward was part of the dispersion following the Assyrian exile. For centuries, their identity blended with the local population, but they retained essential elements of their faith. In 2005, Rabbi Shlomo Amar, then Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, officially recognized the Bnei Menashe as descendants of Israel. Since then, thousands have immigrated to Israel, settling primarily in the Galilee and the Negev desert, where they have learned Hebrew, integrated into Israeli society, and in many cases served in the Israel Defense Forces. Another historic return was that of the Falashas, or Beta Israel, a Jewish community from Ethiopia with roots that some researchers associate with the tribe of Dan. For centuries, they lived isolated from the rest of the Jewish world, maintaining Torah practices, ritual purity laws, and their own festival calendar. In the mid-20th century, the political situation and famine in Ethiopia threatened its survival. The State of Israel organized 2 unprecedented rescue operations: Operation Moses in 1984 and Operation Solomon in 1991. On secret flights, thousands of Beta Israel were flown directly from Ethiopia to Tel Aviv, literally fulfilling the passage in Isaiah chapter 43, verses 5 and 6. "Fear not, for I am with you. I will bring your offspring from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, 'Give here,' and to the south, 'Do not hold back. Bring my sons from afar, and my daughters from the ends of the earth.'" Today, tens of thousands of them live in Israel, preserving their cultural heritage and adapting to modern life, testifying that the dispersion did not nullify the covenant. In South Africa and Zimbabwe live the Lemba people, who for centuries have maintained customs remarkably similar to biblical Judaism. They practice circumcision on the 8th day, avoid eating pork, use symbols such as the 6-pointed star, and relate an origin in a land called Sena, which researchers identify with Sana'a in Yemen. Genetic testing conducted by the University of the Witwatersrand and Stanford University Medical Center found that a significant number of Lemba males carry the Kohanim priestly haplotype, genetic marker found in descendants of Aaron's priestly line. This finding reinforced the theory that their ancestors were Jewish traders who traveled from Yemen to Africa, mixing with local populations, while maintaining their religious identity. Although not all have made Aliyah, some Lemba leaders have traveled to Israel to study and re-establish ties with Rabbinic Judaism. In mountainous regions of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and northern Iran, there are communities with oral traditions linking them to Naphtali, Issachar, and Zebulun. They tell stories of a forced journey from the West centuries ago, and some of their rituals recall ancient Israelite practices, the use of Sukkot-like tents, the recitation of monotheistic prayers, and inherited dietary prohibitions. Although these communities have lived under Muslim contexts for generations, researchers such as Tudor Parfit have documented their collective memory, which points to Assyrian exile and migration routes to the east. Now, rabbis like Eliyahu Avichel see in these returns something much more than a cultural fact. They consider them prophetic signs. Citing passages such as Isaiah chapter 11 verse 12 and Ezekiel 37 verse 22, they affirm that the current process is a foretaste of the great final reunion. Organizations like Shavai Israel are actively working to locate and assist these communities, guiding them through formal conversion processes when necessary and facilitating their integration into Israeli society. Every flight that lands at Ben Gurion Airport with a community like this is, for many, a living page of prophecy. It is a testimony that the God who dispersed Israel as punishment for its infidelity is the same one who is now reuniting it in mercy. This return is still partial. Thousands remain scattered, some without even knowing their roots. However, the steps already taken point toward the fulfillment of what the prophets announced more than 2,500 years ago. The definitive healing of the open wound in Samaria, the restoration of all the tribes under the reign of the Messiah, Jesus. The history of the tribes did not end in Halah, Habor, Gozan, or the cities of Media. History continues, and today we see it unfold before our very eyes. The modern return of the lost tribes is more than a historical fact. It is the prelude to one of the most impressive events in the book of Revelation, the sealing of 144,000 Jews, 12,000 from each tribe, during the time of the Great Tribulation. The Apostle John writes in Revelation 7 verses 4-8, "And I heard the number of those who were sealed. 144,000 were sealed from all the tribes of the children of Israel. Of the tribe of Judah, 12,000 sealed. Of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 sealed. Of the tribe of Gad, 12,000 sealed. Of the tribe of Asher, 12,000 sealed. Of the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 sealed. Of the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 sealed. Of the tribe of Simeon, 12,000 sealed. Of the tribe of Levi, 12,000 sealed. Of the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 sealed. Of the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 sealed. Of the tribe of Joseph, 12,000 sealed. Of the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 sealed." This passage is amazing because although we don't know for sure where all the tribes are today, God does. He knows every lineage, every descendant, even if their last name, language, or culture has changed. And at the appointed time, He will summon exactly 12,000 from each tribe to fulfill this prophetic mission. These 144,000 are not a symbolic number or an indistinct group of believers. The text is clear. They belong to all the tribes of Israel. The seal they receive on their foreheads identifies them as servants of God in the midst of the judgment that will come upon the earth. It will be a special spiritual protection so they can fulfill their work in the midst of tribulation. What we see today, Bnei Menashe arriving from India, Beta Israel from Ethiopia, Lemba from Africa, and communities from Central Asia, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, may be part of divine preparation for that moment. God is gathering His people from the four winds, just as Jesus prophesied, so that when the time comes, there will be representatives from all the tribes ready to be sealed. In Revelation chapter 14, verse 4, these men are described as redeemed from among men, being first fruits to God and to the Lamb. They will have a unique evangelistic mission in the darkest days of history, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom to all nations before Christ's glorious return. Thus the circle closes. In first place, dispersion. From Halah, Habor, Gozan, and the cities of Media, the tribes were scattered. In second place, partial return. In our day, we see communities returning to Israel. In third place, final gathering. At the end of time, the 144,000 will be sealed, completing the perfect number of 12,000 per tribe. And fourth place, messianic government. At Christ's return, the 12 tribes will be united forever under his millennial reign, fulfilling the vision of Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 22. This is the prophetic destiny of the tribes of Israel. The story that began in the mountains of Samaria and the fields of Judah does not end in exile. It ends in Jerusalem, with a restored people, an eternal kingdom, and the Messiah reigning over all nations. And so we come to the end of this video. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for staying until the end and being part of this moment of truth and reflection. If this message spoke to your life, I invite you to like it, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. Because every click, every time you share, you're helping the word reach further and touch more hearts. We'll meet again in the next video with a new message from heaven for your soul. Until then, may God's grace and peace accompany you every day. May God bless you abundantly.